Brad, hot take. To what degree do you think your mind, if you're just sitting in a chair, can affect the physiology of your own body?
Okay, so that's hard to quantify. I would say it can a lot. I don't know how to put something that makes it tangible to people. I would say a lot.
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
Like quite a bit, in the sense that if you are focused and can go inward and pay attention to your body, which most people would call mindfulness or meditation, that you can change quite a bit about how your heart beats, your brain, your stress levels, which ends up resulting in cortisol production or not production. Can you regrow a limb? I don't believe that. That's nonsense. But
of course.
Can you affect healing in an area of the body? By that I mean, let's say you have some chronic disease like an autoimmune disease, which are pretty common. I think that you can affect an improvement there for sure. I think we can get into that, because I think you'll have questions or you'll say what you need to say. Beyond that, beyond some general healing, I don't buy into much beyond that. But I do believe you can change the general chemistry of what's going on in your body. And the simplest example of that would be cortisol levels. Very much so can be influenced by going inward, meditation, breathing, etc. So that's my quick hot take.
That's the strongest example, is cortisol. As far as I know, I'm not a doctor or whatever. I almost feel like we have to play lawyer a little bit more and exclude things. Like, I can hold my breath, and that can cause me to go into this like respiratory, or state where I suddenly am. Of course, my mind can affect my body in that regard. But we're talking about more deeper things and like therapeutic kinds of things. Sure.
PTSD, right?
Yeah. And that's actually a complicated one, because that's a real challenge people face, but one entirely contained in their psychology.
Yes, it's contained in their psychology, but I would interpret it, and again, this is just you and I hot taking this. We're not doctors.
Yeah.
But I would interpret it as a feedback loop between the mind and the body, because when the body is in distress, let's say their body's in distress because they worked out really hard and they're amped up, or they ate a ton of sugar, and it has an effect, right? And then the body gets in distress, and there's a feedback loop through the nervous system back to the brain, and then the brain goes, what's going on? And then the brain gets nervous, and then it feeds back to the body tightens up, cortisol increases, etc., and that feedback loop creates this vicious cycle. So, I certainly, it's a little bit of both. And the way that I look at these meditation and physiology and how they interplay is that there's always a way in to affecting change. And traditionally, I'd mostly looked at it as, okay, well, I need to change something in my body. Like, I'm going to stretch more, which is going to affect the physiological change, which is going to cause my brain to relax a little bit. I'm going to be able to sleep better, or I'm going to work out really hard because that's what I need to affect the change that calms my brain down. Mm-hmm. So like one of the ways in is the physiological, and then the other way in to affect a change in your behaviors or your habits might be in through the brain, right? You can not work out at all, but you can meditate, deep breathe, and make changes in your life that create, pattern habits and new patterns in your brain. So there's multiple ways in there, but I think the right solution for thinking about this is that you have to do both. Like, if you want to affect the greatest change in your physiology, you have to attack it from the physiological and from the mind, and then you'll get the best results. So I said something that in my hot take that made you raise an eyebrow or something. It was about autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because while I think there's certainly something further to be researched about meditation and a lot of good things learned already, it's also an area where there's a borderline between science and pseudoscience. So a lot of good work, but also adjacent to bad work. And the last thing I ever want to hear is someone being told you should stop your chemo regime and instead focus only on meditation. And we both agree that's wrong, I'm sure, right?
Right, yes.
So there's
we do. But to be clear, we do. But the reality is out there that there's a world and where other people do not agree. That, I mean, look at Steve Jobs. Didn't he famously
deny medicine
and died younger because he denied it?
As a result,
he was going to eat broccoli or something and fix his liver or pancreas.
Put candles in his ear. Yeah, very sad.
Oh my God! All right, a quick aside. I had to do the candle. My sister-in-law was a big believer in the candle. What is it called?
Wicking, I think.
Wicking. Yeah, something to that effect, where you put the candle in your ear, you light it, and then it draws the wax out, right?
Uh-huh.
That's the whole idea, right? That's the whole idea. It's in order to draw anything out, you'd have to create negative pressure. And I'm looking at this and going, there's no way that works. I'm like, okay, simple experiment. Let's just hold our hand, put the candle in it, and light it and see if any wax comes out, because it's designed in a way where it catches the wax. And I did that, and lo and behold, earwax came out of my hand, right? It's such a simple experiment to do.
Yes.
So, it blows my mind that people don't do that experiment to go, does this actually do anything? When you buy that thing, it does say, I looked them up on Amazon, it does say, this is for fun only, this is not medical, etc.
Sure.
Right? And so yes, there is this world in which it borderlines on the pseudoscience.
Right.
But
having said that, I think the leading practitioners of meditation as a therapy and as a line of research are not those pseudoscientists. They just happen to live next door to them, unfortunately.
Right. It's unfortunately, because it's adjacent, they can get lumped together, and because we're still learning about it, I also think...
Well, it's also because of what the government's going to allow. Like, if you want to create a drug, you're very well regulated. When you get into these more wishy-washy medical things, you can sometimes charge people high medical prices for services that aren't really regulated because they don't do anything, like massage. You can't I guess you could hurt a person with massage, but generally you don't. So if someone's like, hey, we do this medical massage, there isn't a lot of reason to crack down on them except that it's like fraud and deceptive.
Well, it would be cracked down if it said it's going to cure your cancer, right?
Yeah, that's very true, yeah.
I believe it would be.
Yeah. For sure, yeah.
So,
but then it comes down to what are the real effects, not the nonsense. You raised a really interesting case of PTSD because, as I was saying, it's kind of all psychological. I believe the common thing or the recommended advice if you have PTSD is go see a trained therapist, like you get cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that. And if that works, and I believe there's research to show that it does, then there's no reason the same person couldn't, in theory, sit in a chair and do the same thing to themselves. They just have the benefit of this trained practitioner helping them, which is probably a better path. But in that regard, meditation obviously can have an effect on something like PTSD. Or I wouldn't argue it. I would be very inclined to believe that evidence.
My guess is we could find a paper very easily that talked about the benefits of mindfulness for PTSD. I do remember something interesting, and it had to do with me bridging the gap. I wrote this article about bridging the gap between old science like qi, energy. You know, the Chinese called it qi. Right?
Yep.
Qi, and even I think it was Indian culture had prana or something about the internal energy, right? Most ancient cultures have this concept. Now, in today's lens, we can forgive them because they didn't have science.
Well, they did. Maybe they had the scientific method, perhaps. And they did the best they could with it.
But they have very little evidence gathering. I mean, it was very difficult to see inside the body, to look at the nervous system, to look at cortisol, all these different things. So they had thousands of years of testing things, messing around, and just seeing what worked. And I read this paper that talked about teaching mindfulness to professional swimmers. And teaching them proper breathing and how it did, in fact, improve their swim times. Also improved oxygenation for people at high altitudes, teaching them how to use their inspiratory breathing muscles, and then also, do a form of mindfulness meditation. It improved a lot of these physiological capabilities, right? They got faster. They were able to oxygenate more at higher altitudes. Is it dramatic? Not necessarily, but these were specifically for sports. But if you made a practice of meditating every day, deep breathing properly, going inward, etc., what would the long-term physiological effects, or even what are the short-term physiological effects is interesting to me. We know one thing, having a deep breathing, just deep breathing, nothing aside from controlling your breath, 5 minutes of inhaling or 5 seconds of inhaling, 5 seconds of exhaling. That is majorly beneficial for reducing stress levels, and it can have an effect on the body. So it's a pretty well accepted thing. It's taught by psychologists to help people deal with stress. So, but what is the extent of it? Like I mentioned, autoimmune diseases. I know a lot of autoimmune diseases are triggered by stress.
I don't know much about that. I would take for granted they're exacerbated, but
right. No,
caused is a leap.
Not caused.
Yeah.
What did I say? I hope I didn't say caused.
Oh,
I might have. Doesn't matter. I right. They are definitely exacerbated. Like, let's say you have an autoimmune condition, or borderline, and it's barely there, and you are very stressed for 6 months. That autoimmune condition has a greater likelihood of coming out, and it can be exacerbated by the cortisol levels, the stress levels in your body. I'd be curious specifically how the deep breathing affects the heart and the brain. How does it influence what's going on in the heart? Because have you ever heard of the HRV measurement?
I don't think so. What is it?
HRV is heart rate variability. It basically, think of it as measuring the peak to valley time within the heart wave, right? The electrical output. Right?
Got it.
So it's heart rate variance, heart rate variability. They are now using that as a major indicator of stress levels, and future potential heart disease and other types of diseases. It's something the Apple Watch tracks. Most devices now that are for biofeedback, or not biofeedback, but tracking, will give you the HRV measurement. It's individualized in many cases. I have a friend who's 38 who has an HRV of like 109, whereas mine is in the 60s usually. I'm older than him, but and I know somebody who has a 15 on every day, which is really bad. But the question is, can you affect it? Can you control it? And I read a few papers on this company that helps people train their HRV, and it seems clear that you can. But what effect does that have on the entire, not just the electrical activity from the heart to the brain? Great. Okay, so let's say we improve that. What does it mean to improve it? And then does that have a cascading effect in the biology of the larger system? I don't see why it can't, but what is the
magnitude?
Yeah, what is the magnitude, right?
That's been a lot of why I haven't ever gone deeper into this, because the things I have seen that look scientifically valid appear to be minor effects, like the kind of thing of like, have a cup of coffee a day or don't. That will affect you, but not in some profound way. Like, have some crystal meth every day. That's going to affect you a lot more than a cup of coffee.
Right.
And I think that there's positive effects, and they're good, but they may be of small enough magnitudes that when it comes to, like, as you were pointing out, wearable devices may be predictive of heart disease. I don't know that being like, okay, now I have to adopt a mindfulness regime is the right treatment. Maybe at that point you need to be on medication.
So what you're saying is, well, as my military friends will say, is the juice worth the squeeze?
There you go.
And is it profound enough of an effect that is worth doing for an hour every single day? Or can you do something that's maybe more enjoyable for you? Obviously, there are people who love it, and doing it an hour, 2 hours, or even 3 hours a day is something they enjoy, and great, right? But
yes, absolutely.
That trade-off is worth it for them. And for you, it's the question of, is the trade-off of my time worth the long-term effects? Is it going to add on 15 years, 20 years of my life, right? If that was the case, maybe.
What if I take the time I would have otherwise meditated and I work, and I save that money specifically for medical savings?
Or early retirement.
Yeah.
right? Where they're like the quality of your life, because it really just comes down to the overall timeline of the quality of your life, right?
Right.
And what's the trade-off in the overall quality of your life? Is it massive?
And those are the questions I have.
Right. Like, so let's take the example of someone with PTSD. If you didn't want to take a drug, which a lot of people don't, and I don't blame them.
Fair enough.
So let's say you don't want to take a drug and you're looking for a solution. Cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a trade-off, right? Just as much the same. It's a trade-off. You could do meditation, probably. That's a trade-off. Psychedelics, that's another trade-off. Right. Those have been
something that should be researched more.
They are, absolutely.
Yep, starting to.
So you have these options, and you have to pick the option that might have the best benefit for you. So you might actually say, and a lot of the data I've seen about psychedelics is that they're profoundly effective for PTSD, dramatically effective in a short amount of time.
I've heard that too. I'm tentatively optimistic. I have no firsthand experience, so maybe that's why I'm skeptical. But its adjacency to recreational drugs has always made me a little questioning of it. But I'm glad there's good research going on now.
Yeah, I don't have enough experience there either. Like, I've never done what they call a hero dose, which is a large dose of psilocybin. That
hero dose.
Yeah, they call it a hero dose. I've definitely read about it, so I'm aware of it. There's different dosage levels. There's of course the micro dosing, but the hero dose is the dose where you really go inward, right? And it really forces you to kind of sweat and think about your life. My understanding is that it actually connects the hemispheres of the brain better, and it allows more crosstalk between the brain, which is why you get these weird hallucinations and things. That's my layman's understanding of it, and I could be wrong, but that I believe is. And something else that I know is that deep meditation can cause that same effect. It can cause sort of like the term is a coherence in the brain, where the brain is operating at a very specific wave pattern that resonates throughout the brain, and the crosstalk is consistent and strong amongst the regions of the brain, right? And I suspect that's similar to psychedelics in that way. So again, going back to the central question, right? How much can we influence our physiology, our biology with this? I think the question, it's a tough one, because you feel like if there was dramatic changes that it would have been documented, right?
Correct.
And maybe it has been.
If there were psychics, we'd know by now.
Well, we do know, you're right. We do know that there are people who have spontaneous remissions of cancers, right? And spontaneous like things that just go away. Like
sure.
Vitiligo is a autoimmune disease, right? And it's white spots on the body. There's people who just goes away, right? It is an autoimmune. They can never necessarily put their finger on it. I'm not saying what I'm doing.
But you're making a God of the gaps argument.
What's a God of the gaps argument?
That something you can't explain, so I'm just going to say God did it, or in this case, meditation did it.
Oh, no. Deus ex machina. The God in the machine. No. I'm not explaining anything. I'm saying I'm establishing a basis here that there are these unexplained that we can't explain because we just don't have the data to explain what happened. Like, you'd have to be measuring that person's blood a lot to see what happened, right? What was the change in the blood work? Was there, what was the change in? I mean, you'd have to be monitoring so many variables to actually find that out, and you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, you're also assuming the blood tells the full story, and if it's a mystery, maybe that's not the case. Right,
and it doesn't have to be God; it just has to be lack of data, right?
Yeah, or lack of understanding how to read the data too.
Well, but my point here is that we know that this happens sometimes. And there are doctors who are confused by it, but they're happy, right? Great, you healed. And the doctors probably toss it to the side and say, well, good for them. I have no idea how it happened, so I'm going to forget about it, and I'm not really going to report it, right? What do you do with that information? And so
I don't know. I think it gets written up as a case study.
You think? Okay, I don't know. Well, not a doctor.
I would imagine so, right? Yeah.
It makes sense that they would log it and try to get to the basis of it. Maybe they do some blood work after.
Maybe you can learn the secret.
But the point is that it's possible. So we know it's possible. So the question then becomes, can you influence it to make something that seems impossible happen? Right? it's an interesting area to explore because it's this borderline of science and pseudoscience, right? But to look at it, there's got to be someone who's thinking about this type of information. Like, what happens to all those cases where there's spontaneous remissions of cancers? There's got to be somebody saying, give me all of them. I want to look at them. That would be an interesting thing as well. Like, why? Do we have any
imagine
idea?
So. Yep.
Did they switch to keto?
Sure.
I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm sure there's some data points, but I doubt that anybody was expecting it to happen and collecting blood work every 2 days and doing MRIs every 2 days and doing every battery of tests possible and going, we're just going to hope that it happens at some point. It's just one of those things that's so hard to track and nail down.
And I mean, the immune system plays a big role in it. And I believe there's a lot of variance in how immune systems react. So it could come down to something there where you just had a lucky roll of the dice that your immune system was strong in the right place or found the bad guy immediately or whatever it is.
Right. So many variables. Or you got the COVID vaccine and became a superhuman, right? I mean,
sure, yeah. I'm waiting
possible.
for my powers to emerge.
So, I don't
Brad,
know.
we're both busy professionals. What's a better use of our time, microdosing or meditation? Both things that have minor and questionably measurable effects.
Probably, if you want to talk about time, I enjoy meditation to a large degree because I think it has an effect, and it's interesting to go in. Right, I did it when I was a kid a lot, and got to this place where I was like, how it feels like another time, another space, and it's like you're not even in your body anymore, and it feels like you're leaving your body, and it's actually kind of panic-inducing. I remember sort of having this experience, and again, fully explainable by what's going on in the brain and the nervous system, but it's an interesting thing to overcome. It's like I push towards fears or things that are scary. So in that respect, I enjoy meditation because it's weird and it's spooky in some ways. So I kind of push towards it. You have to go really deep to get there. Like it feels like you're disconnected completely. It's hard to explain without experiencing it. But microdosing, you're not going to get to that with microdosing, is my understanding. You're not going to get to that total separation of experience. But microdosing is imperceptible, and it causes you to sort of loosen up. And if I'm not mistaken, it creates a serotonin dump, but your brain produces more serotonin, or your pineal gland. I think it's your pineal gland produces serotonin. Yeah. So it does cause that because of the compounds that are in psilocybin. As you digest them, it triggers this. So it creates this sense of well-being, this sense of calmness, not a psychedelic experience. To get the psychedelic experience, you have to get up to 1 milligram, 2 milligrams. The hero dose, like I mentioned, 5 milligrams. What would be more beneficial between the two? If your time is of the essence, of course, the psilocybin, right? You got to take that risk, though. Take the risk of, procuring something the questionable.
Yeah, you got to talk to your cousin and all this. Yeah,
right. Whereas meditation, you just sit down and there you go. And there's different types of meditation, by the way. I've read some papers on the different types of meditation and how some don't have much of an effect at all. Some do. And, I have a HRV feedback device, so it's kind of fun to play with it and look at what's going on in your heart rate and your HRV. If I don't control my breathing at all and start thinking about random stuff and watching it go down, and then if you control your breath, watching your HRV go up. So it's certainly there's validity there, but the extent of it.
So that's something very interesting you're presenting. Let's say someone had a family history of heart disease. Could the use of these monitoring tools and some sort of mental exercise regime offset their genetic predisposition? Is it a strong enough effect? Could meditation do that? Or is that person just wasting their time, at the foot of a mountain? They just need to be on medication?
That's a good question. You know, the term epigenetics, right?
Yes.
Like
But share in case some listeners don't.
Yeah, epigenetics is basically whether or not a gene you have expresses itself. And I think there's been quite a lot of talk about epigenetics in the last, 10 years, and how our environment can affect whether or not the gene expresses. So let's say chemical exposure to a large degree. Let's say, you know, you're somebody who works in a paint factory and breathes paint fumes. You might have the expression of certain other genetics that, epigenetics, the expression of certain genes that might not have in the face of, clean air. I don't know if that's the best example, but that's sort of my understanding of it. That's the belief there that genes will express based upon your environment and what you've given them.
More than a belief. That's pretty scientific.
Yeah, not belief, but I'm pretty sure it is. And so you would think that mindfulness and that sort of deep meditation, and let's put it this way, my friend used to say, in the early days of these biofeedback devices, I would wear a watch, and it was this bulky thing, and you had it too. What was it called?
Yeah, I got the same one you got.
Yeah, that measured the
basis,
sweat.
My basis.
Yeah, it would measure your sweat and everything. And he would look at me and laugh and go, "Does that thing have a fun meter on it?" And his point was, because I would look at it, right? I'd be curious.
Me too.
And he'd say, for all the people who are worried about this or that or what they ate or whatnot, what if you just said, I'm going to be at peace with it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not even going to think about it. How much of an effect would that have on you? Just finding that relaxation about not stressing about external things. What would that effect be? Would it be more profound than knowing? My point here is that there must be some degree in which we can help our bad genetics, should we have them, not express themselves by, just simply reducing cortisol levels, which is, again, I believe very proven with meditation, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't see a reason why you can't, through mindfulness, through meditation, through looking inward, affect, in some ways, at least the expression of genes. It stands to reason.
Yeah, you've described a plausible mechanism. It's just a question of magnitudes for me.
Yeah, and we go back to magnitudes, and that's what I think any kind of follow-on would be. I'd be interested in exploring. What is the magnitude of these? And the other question of, is anybody tracking these spontaneous remissions or changes in people and trying to figure out what happened, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, take, for instance, who's the woman whose blood is used?
Henrietta Lacks.
Yes. You want to explain to the audience that?
The HeLa cell. So it was it's been a couple years since that book came out, but as memory serves, it was a woman who reported with some sort of strange disease. They took cultures of it to try and understand what was going on with her. I think she ended up passing, but then unbeknownst to her and her family, something about those cells was very scientifically interesting, kept being studied, and from it emerged a number of lines of therapies that, using that kind of base cell, this HeLa cell that comes from this human being, which is kind of a mutation she had, but this one that turned out to be unbelievably beneficial for medicine. And now, thanks to her, lots of people have gotten different sorts of treatments because of these cells, and this line that all draws back to one person.
I am sure the scientific community is interested in those. You make a good point earlier that they're interested in those people who have these spontaneous remissions of a disease or whatever it is, because it could be the next Henrietta Lacks, right? They discover something about the biology of that person or what was going on with that person that helps them heal future people. There's definitely room to cut through or put a divide between the science and the pseudo here.
For sure.
Right? In a very clear way, because nothing frustrates me more than people who think in binary or black and white and say, well, because it's lumped in with the pseudo-science, therefore, or it's related or adjacent, I just can't even pay attention to it, right?
Yeah.
There's usually a grain of truth in something. I mean, the Chinese with qi and stuff, where we're basically trying to understand how breathing, because everything in Chinese early medicine was about the breath and the qi, and about making sure that everything is relaxed and breathing through your whole body and proper breathing. And what we know now is, that actually has a very big effect on the body. How big is the question?
Yeah. Yeah, it all comes down to efficacy. And thankfully, we have concepts like double-blind trials and all that and the right statistics to analyze it. Although I guess there's probably some interesting challenges in how you blind things like meditation. Like, what's the control? You guys
no meditation, right?
What does that mean?
No meditation at all.
Don't alter your day? Yeah, I guess. Or what then? Okay, what's the sham meditation? Read a book for the same time?
Oh, right.
But you have the sham, so it's like a 1.5 blinded kind of thing. But
Well,
even still, I imagine that there must be clinicians who have ways of figuring stuff like that out.
it might be unethical, but you could teach people wrong.
I like that.
I mean,
yeah.
like you could literally take one group and say, okay, we're going to do the breathing the wrong way, and we're going to teach you to think about the wrong stuff, or something that is the opposite of meditation, which is usually trying to not think of anything.
Focus on all the mistakes you made and the people you've hurt.
Yes, exactly. That would be terrible, I think, but and definitely unethical. But that would be the extreme case. But I think no meditation course of a week, new meditators, and then expert meditators maybe. And I've seen that before too. So that would be, I think, the way to do it.
Yeah, I'm very open to these topics. Never dabbled myself, and partially because I just need to be sold on something more, and the marketing hasn't really penetrated my mind.
Understood. Makes sense. Let's unpack it. Let's see what the data says.
For sure. Exactly.